The Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting. Wes, very good to see you there.
Good evening.
You made very clear in the House of Commons this afternoon that you think the government are going to do the non-dom tax thing that Labour has been talking about for so long. Do you?
I do. That's Jeremy Hunt's... I think his running commentary suggests that. And if he does, it is the mother of all humiliating U-turns, because whether it's Jeremy Hunt or the Health Secretary or scores of Conservative MPs, they have spent years now telling us that this isn't a credible policy, but now they're nicking it. And I think, imagine, we would have used that to deliver 2 million more appointments a year in the NHS. So this is exactly how much of a difference that could have made if they'd done this sooner.
This is exactly my point. You had allocated that money, or £1.6 billion of that money, to retrain or train more nurses and doctors for the NHS. Now you won't have that money. It's been taken away from you, it appears, and being spent on tax cuts now. So what do you do?
Well, this
is that training scheme now gone?
Interestingly, the answer lies in your question, because originally we'd earmarked that money for the workforce plan. Then the Conservatives took Labour's workforce plan, but not the non-dom revenue raiser. So they chose to pay for their workforce plan, our workforce plan, in a different way. It looks like tomorrow they might take the non-dom tax status, seems likely. They might also take some of the things it pays for. We won't know until tomorrow. What I can tell you is that we are committed to those policies that we've spelled out to be funded by the non-dom tax status. If they abolish the non-dom tax status,
and you haven't got the money, then what?
We will have to look at other ways of funding those pledges, but we're committed to them.
To be clear, other ways of funding those pledges involves either raising other taxes or borrowing more money. There's no other ways of doing it.
Well, it'll be consistent with Rachel Reeves' fiscal rules, so we're not going to borrow for day-to-day spending. We will have to look at alternatives if that's the case, but one thing I would say is it seems like the noise from the Treasury is, from the Chancellor, oh, we're terribly clever. We've pinched some of Labour's policies, even though it's going to make our party look completely daft and inconsistent. Haven't we pulled a fast one? Everyone in Westminster knows Rachel Reeves is a chess player. She is already several moves ahead of the Chancellor. It will cause us no grief whatsoever, but I can't wait for Monday's budget debate, where I will remind every single Conservative MP up for election this year that they oppose tooth and nail abolishing the non-dom tax status, and they can explain to their constituents why we haven't delivered 2 million more appointments a year or double the number of CT and MRI scanners, as Labour committed, because of their dogmatic opposition to this policy, which the Tories are now nicking. So I'm looking forward to Budget Day. I've got my popcorn ready, and we'll see whether or not this Chancellor thinks his gimmicks are going to con a country that is on its knees after 14 years of Conservative failure. I don't think that my listeners are that bothered about the gimmicks or the clever games. No, I
think they're really bothered about what's going to happen next. And I think they look at the very, very dramatic shrinking in the public services in going forward, and the £2 billion which the IFS says the NHS is going to lose. I think the biggest real terms cut in the NHS budget since the 1970s. And they say, OK, if Labour is not going to find more money for it, is it not the case that in 2025, Wes Streeting's NHS is going to be in a worse state than the NHS is today?
Well, hang on a second. Before we get to that point, let's see what the Chancellor does in the round tomorrow in his budget. The second thing is, we've been deliberately cautious on tax and spending because we know that tax at their highest levels in 70 years, people can't afford to pay more. And we've got to make sure that the promises we make are promises we can keep, because trust is an even shorter supply in our country than money. So we're being very careful about that. But it says a lot about Rachel Reeves' priorities and the Labour Party's priorities, that in terms of the commitments we have made, both in terms of raising money fairly through things like abolishing the non-dom tax status and the carried profits loophole that benefits private equity fund managers, and the tax breaks enjoyed by private schools and oil and tax companies, fair ways of raising money with progressive ends on vital public services, whether that's our National Health Service to cut waiting lists, or our schools to make sure that working class kids from backgrounds like mine have the same choices and chances as the wealthy kids like Rishi Sunak.
But bit by bit, fiscal statement by fiscal statement, budget by budget, the Conservatives are shrinking your room for manoeuvre in terms of raising money. And that means you're going to have really, really hard choices. Do you not have any anxiety about saying yes, yes, yes to more Tory tax cuts tomorrow, and then what's going to follow in public services for the years ahead?
Anxieties about what we might inherit after a general election, we are full of them. Look at the state of this country. Nothing is working better than it was 14 years ago. People are not better off than they were 14 years ago. That's how they'll judge the Tories.
Meanwhile, you're going on with the tax cuts. As for what we'll do,
you say, shrinking our room for manoeuvre. Andrew, we're winning the battle of ideas. We've won the argument on non-doms. We are winning the argument that taxes on working people are too high, and we will win the argument with the country that after 14 years of Conservative failure, only Labour can offer the change we need. And that argument has to be fought through a general election. That general election can't come soon enough because we cannot afford 5 more years.
Do you know what? I think you will win I think you will win the argument when it comes to the election on those things. But I think what concerns an awful lot of people is that to get there, you are tightening the fiscal envelope that you work in so much that actually you're going to find that 2025, 2026 public services are actually going to be worse than they are today because you're not going to have any money to help anybody for anything.
Well, I don't feel as pessimistic as you do, Andrew. I'll just say 2 things in response to that. One is we've got to build an economy that is growing, because if the economy had grown under the Conservatives at the rate it did under the last Labour government, there would be £40 billion a year more to spend on public services or to give to people in tax cuts without having to hike up taxes on others. And that's the price of Conservative failure. The second thing is we will set out in our manifesto the foundations, the first steps for a decade of national renewal. That's what our country needs. We can't wave a magic wand and fix all of the problems overnight.
It's going to be bloody in the early years, isn't it?
Here's the point, though. In order to win this election, we have to make sure the promises we make are promises we can keep. To deliver a decade of national renewal, we need to make sure we go into a re-election campaign having delivered those promises and having made tangible improvements in terms of the value of the pound in people's pockets and family finances, and also the state of our public services. And
I'm sure that's right.
A challenge we are up for, and I hope that people give change a chance at the general election. You said just now that
you want an election as soon as possible. Do you agree with Jonathan Ashworth that it's likely to be May?
I do. All of the indicators point towards May. It should be May, and I think people are fed up with the idea that Rishi Sunak, for his own personal survival and wanting to clock up 2 years as Prime Minister, will squat in Downing Street into the autumn when people are crying out for change. If he genuinely thinks he can offer the change the country needs, ask the people for their permission at a general election. He has no mandate. Jeremy Hunt has no mandate. These are the 2 losers in Conservative leadership contest. Rishi Sunak lost to the woman who lost to the lettuce and crashed the economy. So I think it's time to ask the country.
Let's just turn back, if I might, to you. A couple of points. Somebody, I don't know who it was, described Wes Streeting as the gateway drug for disaffected Conservatives. Can you remember who that was?
But that'll teach me to make jokes at Labour fundraiser with a Sky journalist sat in front of me. But I make no apology for this. We have got to bring our country together. We know there are loads of disaffected Conservatives out there who are looking for a new political home. And whether it is rebuilding our NHS or our economy and our public services, we've got to bring our country together. And that's the unity of mission and purpose that the Labour Party offers. And if you are one of those millions of disaffected Conservative voters out there, if you are crying out for change and have never voted before, then you've got to give change a chance with Labour at this general election.
Wes, you are a lissom young gazelle, but we've just had Peter Mandelson saying that he thinks one of the things that could be done to help Labour win the election is that Keir Starmer could, quotes, lose a few pounds. What do you think?
Where on earth has he said that?
He said it on the radio today.
Well, as the shadow health secretary, I'm against that kind of fat shaming, and Peter Mandelson should know better. And let me tell you, we've seen the odd paunch from Peter over the years, so people in glass houses, Peter, shouldn't throw stones.
Well, sir, Wes Streeting, thank you very much.